Testing 1, 2, 3. It's pussy talk. Cornish, Turkish, and Rex. It's pussy talk. Balinese, Tonkinese, and Manx. It's pussy talk. Burman, Persian, and Blue. It's pussy talk. Here to learn what about you. Pussy talk.
Hi, this is Mercedes Shank with Pussy Talk, the podcast. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between consuming ideas and creating them. And at first, I thought this episode was going to be about irritation and imitation because I am low-key a little bit frustrated, if not angry. But the more I sit with these feelings, the more I'm realizing that imitation isn't actually the problem. The problem is that we, as a culture, have forgotten how to create. Before I became a cat groomer, I spent almost 15 years as a Montessori guide working with children from birth to 6 years of age. And one of the biggest misconceptions and conversations that I have had about Montessori education is this concept that it suppresses imagination. You know, people hear that Montessori classrooms don't have books on anthropomorphic animals or play that is based off of fairy tales and fantasy. And it is true, like we don't have that type of fantasy during those critical early years. And I think people hear that and they assume that that means children aren't encouraged to be creative. And not only is that just like absolutely false, I would strongly say that it is the exact opposite. Montessori philosophy does not reject imagination, it protects it. This is a philosophy that recognizes that true imagination is built from reality. Before a child can imagine something like extraordinary, they first need to understand the ordinary. You know, we teach them about animals, plants, weather, geography, art, music, language, and just everything that they can about the physical world. And those are the experiences that become the building blocks for something entirely new. So think about it this way. If I tell a child everything there is to know about a unicorn, including what it looks like, where it lives, and what magical powers it has, the child isn't creating. They're remembering. They're recreating someone else's imagination. But if I give that child a deep understanding of horses, deer, birds, insects, forests, and color, then one day they may sit down and invent a creature that has never existed before. And then that idea will belong entirely to them because it came from their own experiences, observations, and curiosity. And again, as a society, I think we've lost sight of that. You know, we live in a culture that just celebrates constant consumption and more so than creation. You know, we consume podcasts, books, videos, social media, and just this endless stream of content like every single day. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing because I am absolutely someone who will bed rot on some TikTok. And I will actually argue that it's actually incredibly valuable because inspiration does matter as much as like education, and learning from people who have gone before us is imperative. Like, what do they say? Like, learn from my mistakes? Yes, please. Like, if I can learn how to do something different because you have already taken that journey, then that's inspiring. The thing that has me in my feels today is that I think we as an industry and as a culture mistake consuming and replicating ideas for creating them. Because knowledge is only the beginning of creativity, not the end of it. And I think, you know, somewhere along the way, we started believing that if we collected enough information, we'd automatically become original, that we could claim the idea as like ours. You know, we ask people what software they use, what printer they bought, where did they source their materials, which AI prompt did you use? You know, we dissect the finished product, hoping that if we replicate enough of the process, we'll end up with something equally meaningful. But originality has never worked that way. The tool has never been the source of the idea, and the idea has always come from the person. Okay, having a 3D printer doesn't make someone innovative any more than like owning a paintbrush makes you Picasso. A camera doesn't make someone a storyteller and a photographer just because you bought the expensive DSLR. Buying the same watercolor paper another artist uses to make a watercolor workbook and to put your AI pictures on there does not give you an artistic vision. They're simply instruments, and they allow creativity to exist, but they don't create it for you. And yes, I'm sitting here like low-key irritated because I feel like a lot of individuals lately have imitated not just the projects that I'm working on, but some of, the bigger impressions that I'm trying to press upon this industry. And there's a difference. There's a difference between sharing something that has been built and like amplifying it so that it reaches more people, and then taking the same message, changing like 10% of the words, and then speaking it as though it's something that you've come up with. And yeah, it's like honestly like super irritating, but what concerns me the most is that as a society, like we're becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the part of creativity that actually matters, and that's uncertainty. Creating something new requires sitting with an idea that no one has validated yet. It requires experimenting, failing, making mistakes, throwing away versions that didn't work, feeling shitty about yourself, questioning yourself, and keeping your best friend up at night at 10 p.m. because you're crashing out and, they just need to bring you back down to earth and tell you, take a deep breath, put your big girl panties on, and try again. And that process is so aggravating and it's so uncomfortable, but it is also where originality lives. And I don't want to come off as like just like on my soapbox, because I get it. Like replication feels much safer. After all, if someone else has already proven that something works, copying pieces of it feels less risky than, asking yourself, well, what if I tried something no one has done before? And that is a terrifying question, but it also happens to be where innovation begins. As many of you know, I've spent the last several years building projects that I'm incredibly passionate about. The Holistic Feline Summit that's happening here in Sedona this October. The Feline Superstitious Cat Grooming Convention in 2027 that will be the United States' first and only feline grooming convention. The Feline First Certification Program, What's the Muse magazine, and, this podcast. But every one of those ideas started way before anyone else ever saw them. They began as notebooks full of scribbles, like voice memos recorded while driving, ideas that sounded far-fetched and ridiculous at first, just dreams that, I shared with my friends, and, lots and lots of revisions that didn't work, and months and years of refining before they ever became public. So a good example of this is the What's the Muse magazine. It actually started off as a newsletter that I was providing for the Arizona Professional Groomers Guild. And I wanted to provide some education because at least here in Phoenix, there's a lot of aspiring cat groomers who don't necessarily have the budget or the priorities to go seek out professional personalized instruction. So I wanted to offer tidbits to, help more safety and help, better handling. So when I'm getting these new clients coming from different, grooming areas, they're not like completely traumatized because I could recognize a need of people who just had to have more support, and I wanted to provide it. The newsletters, we did for about a year, and then I was really inspired. I love writing so much. It's such a way that I express myself and, get all my feelings out, verbally, process my stream of consciousness. And I've always known that I've wanted to write a book about my method and approach of cat grooming because I have high hopes for this industry and the way that we approach animals. And so I started off by writing like this idea here became an article and this idea there became an article. And pretty soon, you know, a lot of my friends were like, wow, like you popped that book out in like 4 months. And I'm like, actually, a lot of what's in my book stems from articles that I've already written touching on these subjects so that when it's time to, you know, compose my book, I've already got all of the components written out. But yeah, like from an outside lens, it's like, oh shit, you know, she wrote an entire 200-page book in 4 months. And I think when people see, like when they finally get to see the finished version, it's so easy to believe that this idea appeared overnight when it didn't. You know, they're actually, what they're seeing is like the last 5% of a process that took years. And I'm going to call it interesting. I've noticed something interesting whenever I release a new project. One of the first questions I often receive, it's not, you know, what inspired you? It's, hey, what program did you use? Where did you print it? What company made this? Can you tell me exactly how you did it so I can do it too? And y'all, like, I might sound like a brat, but I'm so tired and I feel so protective over it. Like, I understand why people ask those questions because I've asked them too. Technical knowledge is valuable, but technical knowledge isn't the same thing as creative thinking. Knowing how someone manufactured an idea doesn't explain where the idea came from. And, you know, recently, someone told me something that I've been carrying with me ever since. I was talking to them about how, you know, suddenly all of these, you know, big things are happening and it's really great and like a bunch of people want to be involved. And I feel in my heart that it's like disingenuous. And I feel like they want a piece of the magic and they want to be a part of it, but it's not something that they have a history of like investing in, or they, you know, like, I'm just going to say it, like they want to have their name a part of it because we are. As an organization, I truly believe that the Association of Holistic Feline Specialists is making like what I call history. But I want to see people thrive. But on the other hand, like, it's very disheartening when I come out with something and then all of a sudden, like, everyone else is doing it. So what they told me is that it is not my responsibility to make sure that other people thrive. And at first, like, it felt really uncomfortable because I genuinely love teaching and I love mentoring. I love, you know, being an inspiration because I believe in collaboration and I want people to grow. And I want this industry to become stronger. But I also realized something equally important, and that is helping someone develop their own ideas is very different from giving them yours. Because real mentorship does not create copies, it creates more creators. And that distinction just changed the way I think about leadership. If all we ever do is teach people to replicate what already exists, then everything just eventually starts looking the same. The market becomes saturated, not because there are too many talented people, but because too few of people are willing to trust their own imagination. And this world doesn't need another version of someone else. It needs a version of you that nobody else could have imagined. And I think the first step that so many people need to ask themselves is, are you looking for clout or are you looking for creativity? Because originality isn't something that you're born with. It's something that you practice. The more experiences that you collect, the more questions you ask, the more curious, you become. And the more you are willing to fail, the more your own voice will begin to emerge. And I'm not going to lie, when you do find your voice, people may imitate your products and try to replicate your branding. And they can even, imitate your event, your artwork, your writing style, or your ideas. But they will never duplicate the mind that keeps creating them. Because while they're busy looking backward, trying to recreate what already exists, you will already be imagining what comes next. And that, to me, is the real difference between a consumer and a creator. One keeps you chasing someone else's future, and the other allows you to build your own. And I think one of the things I've realized is that I'm no longer focused on who did it first. What I'm interested in asking is who pushed it further. Because history remembers the people who dared to add to something to the conversation, not just repeat it. So first of all, give credit where credit is due, because inspiration absolutely deserves acknowledgement. Teachers deserve gratitude and mentors deserve respect. But remember that respect isn't replication. The greatest way to honor the people who come before you is not by becoming a shadow of their work. It's by carrying their influence into places they never had the chance to go. So if I've inspired you, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't want another me. I want a better you. Because if every one of us found the courage to stop asking, how can I do what they're doing, and started asking, what can I contribute that no one else can, we'd stop filling the world with copies and start filling it with possibilities. And I think that's a world worth creating.